Good evening, Vanshika. So I'm Rahul Saha, and in the last class, we had conversed about the regulators, the confirmers, right? The suspensors who like to suspend, and also the migrators as the general type of adaptation which are existent in the organisms, and these are the ways that the organisms are able to cope up with regards to the change in the habitat and the environment. So today we'll be focusing our attention on the adaptation and then the growth curve. Okay. So coming to the word adaptation, if we talk about adaptation, then adaptation is what? It is an extremely essential entity, you can say. It is an extremely essential entity which concerns or which deals with the adaptation. Are they, you can call, useful, morphological? It deals with the morphological, physiological, physiological or behavioral changes, behavioral changes that are acquired by the living organism living organisms over a long period of time, over a long period of time in order to adjust itself, or in order to adapt, in order to adjust, in order to acclimatize itself to a specific or particular habitat or environment. And the individuals of a species or the species as a whole who are not able to adapt will be ultimately eradicated as per the Darwin's law of natural selection. And then by neo-Darwinism or the synthetic theory of evolution, if that species has been able to adapt, if that species has been able to acquire variation, right, through the switching of the chromosomes, translocation, or through the homologous recombination, which is again a type of translocation only, but translocation can happen in non-homologous chromosomes also. So via homologous recombination or non-homologous enjoining reciprocal translocation, non-reciprocal translocation, then insertions, frame shift mutation, that is known as insertion, deletion. So by all types of mechanistic theories, then epigenetic modifications, histone acetylation, deacetylation, methylation, demethylation, then phosphorylation, ubiquitination, various you can say modifications in the histone dynamics, covalent modification of histones via HWI, SNF complexes. So all these things will do what? They can hyper express or silence a specific gene which may be required to be hyper expressed or to be silenced or to be moderately expressed in order for that organism to acquire a specific adaptation in order to thrive in that specific habitat or environment. So the organism which can do it, which can acquire it, which can develop it, they will have then the differential reproductibility because they'll be able to reproduce in a or at a faster rate compared to the species or the individuals who have not been able to adapt, and that will give or bestow them with the ability to have comparative reproductive success, and that will lead to the proliferation rate, that will lead to the enhancement in the proliferation rate, that would lead to the increase in the proliferation or in the sheer number of that specific species. Okay, so we had also discussed about the environment not being constant because our actions do change the environment, right, in the last class. So the living organisms must have and inherent ability to change. Because if you are completely rigid, completely stagnant to what you are, you cannot do it, like you cannot bring about any change in your genome, epigenome or genome, then you can say it's just a matter of time that you will be eradicated via natural selection, because we our actions do change the environment. That changing environment will put selective pressure. This cycle keeps on going and going. So it's a ceaseless cycle. So we must have the ability to adapt. We must have the ability to change our genetic sequences time and time again. Okay, that is why adaptation is known as the basic cause or the root cause or the essence of evolution. Okay, so and it is what? It is nothing but accumulation of useful variations. Variations could again be favorable and non-favorable. If it is a favorable variation and that gets accumulated, it will lead to adaptation. And then if the variation keeps on happening, it keeps on getting accumulated, the favorable ones over a long period of time, tens and tens of generations, then a time will come when the two species have diverged in such a manner that once you go for, you can say, mating of the two species, right? Then they will not be able to mate properly. Even if they do mate, they will not be able to produce fertile and, you can say, conducive offspring. Conducive in the sense that the offspring will not be able to live properly throughout its life. It wouldn't be able to reach the puberty stage also, right? So it wouldn't be a viable and it wouldn't be a fertile offspring. So when we come to the types of speciation, okay, so types of speciation, you have parapatric speciation, sympatric speciation, okay, then allopatric speciation. There are multiple types of speciation, okay. So I'll tell you some types of speciation also. Once we deal with speciation, it's very important, significant concept here. Speciation. A lot of research projects also are underway in our own country, India, regarding the speciation in case of yeast. These are the model organisms, yeasts, or speciation in case of Drosophila melanogaster. Okay, so speciation is quite a hectic topic, and it's a very essential topic also to comprehend. Okay, so that is nothing but process of development of new species. Okay, always know the barrier is reproduction here, process of development of new species, because the two new species, if they do reproduce, they cannot give rise to a viable and fertile offspring. Okay, commonly it is a consequence or commonly results from, you say, barriers to gene flow. Okay. There must be a barrier to gene flow, because then only the species will be segregated properly, which then will be subject to different types of selective pressures, right? So there are various mechanisms, okay, of speciation. We have, you can say, parapatric speciation, allopatric speciation. Okay. If I talk about allopatric speciation, so it is also known as the first type of speciation that could be asked in NEET examination or board examination, allopatric speciation. So allopatric speciation, if you talk about, it is also known as speciation which occurs when two populations of the same species, okay, of the same species. they separate into you can say completely segregated groups which are isolated from one another or from each other, you can say. That is the first type of speciation pertaining to geographical isolation as the primary root cause. Okay. So here what happens is a physical barrier is required. So how will you isolate the two species? Suppose there was one species thriving at this specific area. Now you want to have a division, a specific, you can say diversion, and that isolates this species into two parts. Okay. Now the gene flow is prevented. Again, I told you the gene flow must be prevented. So this gene flow is prevented because of this very, you can say, barrier. So this is a physiological barrier, right, which prevents the gene flow, and these two species are then subject to different selective pressure in area A, different selective pressure in area B. You will be having a physical barrier like a mountain range or a waterway, okay, so which makes it impossible for them to breed with one another. They can one another, so the gene flow is completely ceased. So the barrier here will be a physical barrier. Like a mountain range, or you can say a waterway or a water body. And just imagine that A and B, these two specific areas, have different habitats. What will happen is they'll go through various generations. They will keep on give rise, or they'll give rise to various generations under A and B habitat, which are different. Okay, if you compare it with each other, and then after various generations, if you then mate A and B, then the two cannot give rise to a proper viable and fertile offspring. If that does happen, then A and B have undergone speciation to a new species. That is the meaning. So each species will develop differently based on the demands of their, you can say, unique habitat or the genetic characteristics of the group that are passed on to the offspring. Okay. So one of the best example is, if you have seen, good evening, Ayman and Ayushi. So if you have seen, or if you have heard of, you can say, Arizona. Arizona contains the deepest canyon, the Grand Canyon. Okay. So in case of Arizona, which is there in USA, in Grand Canyon, when the Grand Canyon was formed, okay, so the squirrels and other small mammals that had once been part of a single population could no longer contact and reproduce with each other, okay, because of the formation of this specific new geographical barrier known as the Grand Canyon, the deepest canyon in the world or the largest canyon in the world. So they could no longer interbreed. Now the squirrel population underwent allopatric speciation here. Squirrel population in Arizona, like after the Grand Canyon formation, they underwent allopatric speciation. This is an extremely important concept considering the NEET syllabus. Okay. Allopatric speciation. Okay. Now, what happened is today two separate specific squirrel species inhabit the north and south rims of the canyon. Okay. So this is what it has happened. Also, birds and other species that could easily cross this barrier continue to interbreed, and they were not divided into separate species, but these specific squirrel population, they could not. So you have a specific squirrel species which is present in the north rim of the Grand Canyon, and another squirrel which is at the south rim of the Grand Canyon. Okay. So this is known as, you can say, allopatric speciation. Okay. So mainly in NEET examination, if you consider board examination, if you take, You will be asked only sympatric, allopatric, mostly two. In NEET examination, you will be asked 5 types of speciation. Number 1 would be allopatric. For NEET, I am saying. Number 2 is, you can say peripatric. Number 3 will be sympatric. Not even sympatric, there will be parapatric. Peri, para, then sim will come. Then sympatric. Number 5 is a type of speciation known as artificial. So these 2 are asked in home examination or board. These 5 are asked in your NEET course, NEET examination syllabus. Coming on to the second one known as the peripatric speciation. Okay. As we'll be solving on, you can say, more than 100 NEET questions per chapter now. I have prepared the entire set. Okay. And you might be aware, I don't know if you're aware, again the return of the, you can say, 2 years ago, there used to be a, you can say, value based question. So this time it won't be value based, it would be a different question known as case study question. Okay, so the case study question, or you can say the value based questions, are returning back to the syllabus for this year's board examination of CBSE, okay, and ICSE both. Especially CBSE, the announcement has been made that the value based questions, 2 value based questions of 4 marks each in physics, chemistry, biology will be asked in the paper, 8 marks. So it will be a reasoning question. Reasoning in the sense, a case study will be given to you. You can call it a case study question. Earlier we used to call it value based question. So case study will be given to you, and from that case study only you have to be smart enough and your concept must be clear. The biological or the physical or the chemical concept should be clear based on that paper, that you will be able to solve 4 1 mark question each, total 8 marks. Okay, so we'll make you practice those questions also once the course is done. Okay, so in case of peripatric speciation, we saw in, you can say, allopatric speciation, what did we see? That physical barriers make it impossible for members of the group to interbreed with one another. Okay, but in case of peripatric, first I'll write the definition. When a small group of individuals break off from the, or segregate from the larger group, and form a new species. This is called as peripatric speciation. So as we saw in allopatric speciation, what happened was, you can say, physical barriers did make it completely impossible, okay, for members of the group to interbreed with one another. But the main difference, there is only a subtle difference between allopatric and peripatric, is that in peripatric speciation, one group is much smaller than the other. After the division, okay, suppose group A and B, so B will be much smaller than the other. So unique characteristics of the smaller groups are passed on to future generations of the group, okay, making these traits more common among that group, and it will distinguish it from the other species. Meaning that this is a very small sample size, you can say. Sample size is very small. Okay. So we'll have discernible characteristics, and when you pass it down, okay, when you pass it down, so since it is a very small sample size, so you will see discernible changes and you will be able to see speciation. Okay. So that is the only way which can happen. So here this will not undergo speciation because this is there in its own. So if breaking off is happening, small groups, 2-3 groups can break off and they can undergo speciation. Okay, very small groups can break off. Okay, so that environment remains the same. Other groups can break it off from there and they can undergo speciation from that perspective. Okay, only a subtle change here. This one stays the same. Okay, suppose 1000 individuals, so 900 individuals stayed, and 10 individuals of 10 groups they segregated. It is like that. Okay, that is all about your peripatric speciation, a very small variation in allopatric. Now coming into parapatric speciation. So here a species is spread out over a large geographical area. Okay, what is there? Although it is possible for any member of the species to mate with one another, mating is not affected. Individuals only mate with those, like by common sense only, in their own geographic region. Suppose you have this huge area. Okay, so some individuals are here, some individuals are here, some individuals are here of the same species. So group A, group B, let's divide it into 3 groups. Okay, group C. So if I ask group C1 to come and mate with group A, it is highly unlikely because it has to travel a long distance. Suppose I'm talking about a tundra biome. So right hand side of the tundra biome and left hand side. So 2 poles, you can say 2 extreme sides of the tundra biome. So they wouldn't be crossing that far, they wouldn't be traversing or traveling that far in order for them to mate. Okay, so they are, so still gene flow is possible, but there is, you can say, an artificial, you can say, segregation because of the sheer distance between the 2 specific groups of the same species. So since the distance is too much, you can have difference in habitat. Habitat A, here you can have little bit of different habitat. Habitat C, you can have different habitat because of the sheer, or by virtue of the sheer distance, the sheer large distance existing between the 2 species. Okay, so like allopatric and parapatric, different habitats will influence the development of different species, and that is known as parapatric speciation. So here, instead of being, again I'm reiterating, separated by a physical barrier, the species are separated by distances which lead to differences in the same environment. Which will lead to differences in the same environment. That is known as, you can say, parapatric speciation. Okay. So one of the best examples is if the environment has been polluted. Okay. Suppose mining activities, they leave waste with high amounts of metals like lead and zinc, right? Mining activities, lead, zinc. Okay. So these metals are absorbed by the soil, then it will prevent most plants from growing. Okay. So some grasses such as buffalo grass, these grasses are able to tolerate this metal, tolerate this toxic heavy, mostly this is the heavy metal, lead, tolerate these metals. Okay, so buffalo grass, okay, it is also known as vanilla grass. In certain parts of Europe, is native to Europe and Asia, okay, but is now also found throughout North and South America. Okay, why? Because buffalo grass has become a unique species from the grasses that grow in areas which are not polluted by metals. Okay, so what has happened is Long distances can make it impractical to travel to reproduce with members of other species. So buffalo grass seeds pass on the characteristics of the members in that region to the offspring. Okay, so what happens is sometimes a species which is formed by parapatric speciation is especially suited, completely suited to survive in a different kind of environment than the original species. So now it has spread all over. Okay, the buffalo grass one. The next one, sympatric, is little bit complex and also you can say controversial. The sympatric speciation, I'm telling from before only, it is little bit of, it has controversy. Okay, means logical controversy, kind of controversial as per me. So why it is controversial, I'm saying it because some scientists, some evolutionists do not believe in its existence. Okay, but what happens is by definition sympatric speciation occurs when this kind of speciation occurs when there are no physical barriers. Just like parapatric, no physical barriers. Okay, preventing any member of a species from mating with another. Any member of a species, you can say, from mating with another one. Another. Okay, so a new species, perhaps based on a different food source or characteristic. Okay, this seems to develop spontaneously. Okay, so that is a specific controversy here. So the theory, if we talk about, is that some individuals become dependent on certain aspects of the environment, like such as shelter or food sources, while others do not. So possible example, so this is asked in NEET examination as one of the toughest questions. So a possible example of sympatric speciation is the apple maggot. So if you look at an apple maggot, okay, so it's a pretty confusing one. That's why I'm giving a specific example and try to explain by this example only. An insect, it is what? An apple maggot is what? It is an insect that lays its egg or eggs inside the fruit of an apple. Okay, then lays eggs inside the fruit of an apple and it causes it to rot. Okay, it will become rotten. Now as the apple falls from the tree, the maggots dig in the ground before emerging as flies several months later. That is the cycle. They'll fall on the ground. The apples will fall on the ground, the maggots will dig in. Okay. Then after several months they'll come out as flies. Okay, so that is the cycle. Now the apple maggot originally laid its egg where? In the fruit of a specific species of the apple. Okay, but after apples were introduced to North America in the 19th century, a type of maggot developed that only lays its eggs in apples. Okay, the original apple species, okay, or the original, you can say, species of the apple maggot laid its egg in a specific relative of apple. So this didn't come on its own. So when it was seen in North America, okay, what happened was this apple maggot laid its egg in a specific relative species of apple known as hawthorn. Okay, It used to lay its egg inside a hawthorn, a specific hawthorn. But after apples were introduced in North America in 19th century, a type of maggot developed that only lays its egg in apples. Now it only lays its egg in apples, no longer in hawthorn. So the original hawthorn species still only lays its eggs in hawthorn, but there was a generation of new species, okay, which lays its egg in apples only. Okay, so the two types of maggots are not different species, yet many scientists believe that they're undergoing the process of sympatric speciation because those specific type B type maggots prefer to lay their eggs in apples, type A prefer to lay their eggs in hawthorn. But the thing is, there is still not different species completely. If you put B in A, they will still lay egg in A also, in hawthorn also. So this is quite a controversial one. Sympatric. That's why the toughest questions are asked in NEET from this sympatric only. Okay. Last one is artificial. Artificial means creation of new species by people. Okay, via lab experiments. If you go for insertional inactivation of a gene or site-directed mutagenesis, gene knockout experiments. So that way you can get it done. Transgenic gene, if you put it in, okay, knock in, knockout, then you can go for all that. But that is the sympatric speciation, quite controversial because still they haven't undergone speciation, because when they were introduced in North America, so some environmental or some, you can say, selective pressure would have happened that it made them to prefer apple to hawthorn, okay, and they started laying their eggs inside apples more. Earlier they used to lay egg inside the hawthorn only, okay, so you can call it that they are preferring the food source, just what I told you, the food source or that is specific resource more over the other, but they're still not a specific other species in that sense, okay. But if it continues to happen, and it is continuing to happen, so in the end, after 10 years or 40 years, you can say after multiple generations, they can become separate species, these two. Okay, so that can happen. So in that sense, so then we can talk about thermoregulation. Okay, thermal regulation in animals. Some animals bring changes in their morphology or anatomy for thermoregulation. So under thermoregulation, we have few important laws which are asked in your board and NEET classes and syllabus also, and question papers. The number one is the Bergmann's rule. Bergmann's rule. So this rule explains one fundamental thing. I'll write down a definition first. The birds and mammals, which are the homeothermal creatures, endothermal, warm-blooded, okay, birds and mammals of cold regions are large-sized or are larger in size compared to those of warmer regions. Warmer regions. Okay. So the best example is, look at the polar bear. So the polar bear is much larger in size when you compare it with, you can say, the black bear of the temperate area. Temperate area means of the hotter side or warmer side of the climate. Okay. Polar bear means very, very cold area, Arctic, Antarctic one. And you can also compare the size of the Antarctic penguin. Antarctic penguin, okay, with the penguin of the equatorial Galapagos Islands. It is near the equator. We know that equator is much warmer than Antarctic. Okay, so the Antarctic penguin is about 1 meter long, while the penguin of equatorial Galapagos Islands is only a half meter long. So half a meter, you can say 0.5 meter difference is present. Okay. Oh, so why does this rule exist? It exists because of a simple surface area rule that large sized body will have less surface area per unit of mass. Therefore, it loses less amount of heat. Okay, so I'll write it down for you. A large sized body will always have lesser surface area per unit of mass. Therefore, will lose lesser amount of heat. That's why they are bigger, so that they have lesser surface area per unit of mass. Therefore, they are less vulnerable to death in those specific, you can say, shivering and trembling, bone chilling conditions, and they lose lesser amount of heat. Okay, in the Antarctic and Arctic climate, when they are Arctic and Antarctic dwellers, right? So lesser amount of heat is lost. That is the basis of, or that is the law on which this specific Bergmann's rule is based upon. Okay. Now we come to second number rule is the Allen's law, or the Allen's rule. When we come to Allen's rule, the tail, snout, pinnae of ears, okay, the tail, snout, pinnae of ears and legs of mammals are relatively shorter in colder parts or in colder climates than in the warmer climate. In the species living in colder climate compared to the ones living in warmer climate. So this is all about your Allen's rule. So it was noticed in, you can say, the foxes and gazelles. So pinnae of the desert fox are large sized. So if you look at the pinnae of the desert fox, it is large sized. And if you look at the pinnae of the red fox, okay, and those of the Arctic fox, so red fox is small sized. When you go further down the line, in case of temperature, Arctic fox, which dwells in the coldest of the temperature, it is the smallest size. Okay. So the thing is, once you go, because this is present at the highest temperature, moderate, and this is present at the lowest temperature. So what happens is, As structures lose lesser and lesser amount of heat when the surface area is lesser and lesser. That is the thing. Because the pinna, if it is too large, it will provide more and more surface area. By large pinna, that will lose more and more amount of heat, which is going to be detrimental if you are living or dwelling in a specifically bone chilling or cold climate. Okay, chilling climate. Okay, so in chilling climates, you don't want this to happen because that will cause excessive and exaggerated heat loss. Whereas in case of warm climate, you would want more surface area so that the heat can be lost easily and you do not be a victim of heat shock, okay, of increased body temperature. So the differences occur in the requirements, and that is the kind of, again, adaptation or thermoregulatory adaptation that is inculcated or that is imbibed by these specific organisms upon them in order for them or in order to enable them to thrive and proliferate in their respective habitats. Okay. Now the third rule is the Jordan's rule. So the fishes found in waters of low temperature waters of low temperature tend to have more vertebrae than those of warmer water fishes. Those of warmer waters. Okay, so I can give an example here. 58 vertebrae are present in a cod. 58 vertebrae are present in a cod which hatches eggs at, you can say, 4 to 8 degrees Celsius. Okay. And same cod species, 54 vertebrae are present in the same cod species which hatches egg at 10 to 11 degrees Celsius. Okay, that is the difference. Okay, that is known as Jordan's rule. Now if we come to the next rule known as Glauber's rule. The mammals, birds and insects of tropical region and insects of tropical region, tropical means warmer region, okay, tropical region, are, you can say, darker in color and heavily pigmented okay, if you compare it with than those of the Arctic region or than those of the polar region, Arctic and Antarctic both. Okay. But there are exceptions to this rule. You have tree frog known as hyla, okay, and horned toad. Hyla, which are the tree frogs, and you have horned toad, which are known as, you see, rhinosoma. They are again dark skinned, but they dwell in low temperature. So these are the two exceptions. Many exceptions are there, but I'm just telling you an exception to this law. Okay. Low temperatures. Then you have Rentius rule. So the birds of colder regions tend to have relatively narrow wings than the birds of warmer regions. Again, surface area rule, right? Narrow wings than the birds found in warmer areas. Warmer areas. Okay. You can also see polar bears and polar sea animals like seals have a thick layer of fat known as blubber in their subcutaneous zone of the skin. So the blubber acts as what? It acts as an insulator and reduces loss of body heat. Okay. And small aquatic animals like you can say Daphnia, they show change in their body shape and structure with seasonal temperature changes, which I have talked about in the previous classes. That is known as cyclomorphosis. Okay, change in the structure of the body organs as per the specific season. Okay, so then we have thermal regulation in plants also are present. So plants also protect themselves from extremes of temperature by how? They develop thick cuticle. Protein cutin is present in cuticle. Okay. Then they can produce thick corky layer. Okay. Cork cambium. Then they can produce spiny leaves in case of Opuntia. Okay. They can produce dense hair coat, mucilage. Numerous things they can do. Mucilage and also produce tannins. Okay. They can have sunken stomata. They can develop the CAM pathway, crassulacean acid metabolic pathway, a CAM photosynthetic pathway, which you might have learned in class 11th, right? So, do these things they can go for, okay? Then desert animal and plants, they also develop adaptations for osmoregulation, okay? Adaptations regarding osmoregulation. Osmoregulation means, suppose in desert animals, if I talk about, okay, so if we talk about spiny lizard of Australia as an example, okay, Moloch horridus is the scientific name. Horridus, okay. So they contain, or this specific species, it contains hygroscopic glands in the skin which can absorb or which enables them to absorb water from the moist sand only. Hygroscopic gland on the skin. Okay. Now, if we talk about desert rabbit, okay, also kangaroo rat, okay, pocket mouse, they feed on kangaroo rat. They feed on dry seeds and vegetation. Okay, so these animals they feed on dry seed and vegetation. Think of that. So how do they cope up biochemically? Okay. They do cope up biochemically because these animals depend only on metabolic water produced during their fat acid oxidation. So metabolic water production, which happens when you have their fatty acid oxidation and also F1 F0 ATPase production. So you have metabolic water production that happens in our body also. So that is only till 200 ml in human body. So that is metabolic water production. So they rely upon only metabolic water body or water production in order to keep up with all the metabolic processes. So that is that minimal amount of water that they require. Okay, F1 if not ATPase. So that is the sole water source that they have. Okay. And kangaroo rats, which are found in North American desert, they lose very small or minuscule amount of water as they expel highly hypertonic urine. Okay, so we have our vasa recta, we have our thick ascending limb of Lower countercurrent multiplication, countercurrent exchange. So they have specific countercurrent, okay, which will develop highly hypertonic urine. Okay. Then carnivorous animals like grasshopper mice and marsupial mulgara, they eat upon the insects. Okay. If we talk about grasshopper mice, they eat upon the insects and small rodents to draw food and water. Okay. And desert rabbit and wood rat also what they do is they derive water by eating succulent plants. So succulent plants will have water, okay, contained in them. So they eat succulent plants. So this is adaptation for acquiring moisture. When we talk about adaptation for conserving moisture, okay, what happens is camel has water cells. Camel has got water cells in the wall of its stomach to store metabolic water formed during, again, biological process of breakdown of fats stored in its hump. Okay. In various desert animals, the number of sweat glands is greatly reduced or absent again. Okay. Sweat glands are reduced or absent. Okay. And desert insects have a waxy waterproofing coat on their body surface in order to minimize water loss. Okay. And also desert lizard is also known as Euromastix genus desert lizard. It stores water in large intestine. mm, large intestine where we have tenacoli, special, it's a longitudinal and horizontal muscle layer which form the hostra, because we go through or we show hostral churning, right? So a camel, which I told you has water cells. One more fact I'd like to tell you, that it can lose up to 20% of its body weight by losing water from its body tissues and not from the blood. Okay, so it doesn't have any ill effect. Okay, so that is the way camel can, or they are known as the, you can say, ship of the desert, right? So you can also go for, you can say, phenotypic adaptation or physiological adaptations. Those things you can also go for. Phenotypic slash physiological adaptations. Okay. So phenotypic adaptations are what? These are those adaptations which enable the organism these are the adaptations that enable the organism to respond quickly to a stressful situation. To a stressful situation. Means, if I give you an example, many natives of the Andes and the Himalayas live at an altitude above, you can say, 13,000 feet. In these individuals, what happens? Oxygen carrying capacity of their blood is much higher than those of the natives at the sea level, like us. So it is due to the presence of greater amount of hemoglobin in their blood. Okay, they have high erythropoietin level, EPO level produced by their kidney. They have high amount of RBC, okay, which can, which are generated erythrocytes by concave cells, 120-day lifespan, right? So it is an example of what? A phenotypic biochemical adaptation. So the atmospheric hypoxia doesn't occur there, okay, because the less oxygen will cause hypoxia in normal people. If you go there, you will suffer from hypoxia. So hypoxia was awarded, okay, von Hippel-Lindau factor. VHL was for that work. It was awarded Nobel Prize last year. Okay, so hypoxia HIF1, hypoxia inducible factor 1, is not induced in these specific humans only, which the generations of whom have been thriving and have been dwelling in those specifically, you can say, harsh high altitude regions, but it will be induced in our body when we go up or when we descend up or when we ascend upwards. Okay, we will suffer from altitude sickness, which will be characterized by hypoxia causing nausea, fatigue, then tachycardia in the heart or heart palpitation due to, again, hypoxia or less availability of oxygen. Okay, then we can go for biochemical adaptations. Okay, the last one is the biochemical adaptation. So these are those adaptations in the biochemical cycle. Okay. Biochemical adaptations. So these are those adaptations in the biochemical cycle biochemical cycles, okay, or biochemical reactions and the production of the enzymes controlling such reactions which enable them to live in the extreme environment and species to thrive in extreme environments or in extremely adverse environment or habitat. Okay. So when we talk about thermal tolerance, okay, what we have is most of the physiological functions I told you are performed optimally at temperature of about, you can say 36.9 degree Celsius, 98.6 degree Fahrenheit, or generally ranges from 25 to 40 degrees Celsius, because enzymes, they work at a specific temperature. I have already explained to you that fact, okay, in the enzymology classes. Okay, so what happens is, but we have many types of microbes like archaebacteria, which are not true bacteria, archaebacteria, okay, who are extremely resistant to any kind of high temperature. Like they can dwell in, you can say, thermophiles. They can dwell in more than 100 degrees Celsius in the hydrothermal vent, okay, and many fishes in the Antarctic waters with sub-zero temperature can also dwell in that case, because can also dwell in that chilling environment, because those fishes, they produce antifreeze glycoproteins. In chemistry you might have learnt about antifreeze. It doesn't let your gasoline get frozen, okay, at very low or sub-zero temperature. So they have specific glycoproteins, glycosylation of proteins happening in the Golgi apparatus, which act as antifreeze glycoproteins, AGP. Okay, doesn't let your biochemical process get halted, and here these enzymes doesn't get denatured at high temperature. Okay, that's why we can use stacked DNA polymerase derived from, again, a thermophile known as Thermus aquaticus, right, for the, you can say, extension step going at 70 degrees in the polymerase chain reaction. Okay, so we have all these types of adaptations. Okay, we have also pressure tolerance. Okay, a great variety of marine invertebrates and fishes flourish at great depths in the ocean, where the pressure is even more than 100 times the normal atmospheric pressure. So all these types of tolerances are present. Okay, so I hope you are able to comprehend the lecture. If you have had any kind of doubts or queries, you can ask me on my personal number. I will reply to you as soon as possible. Okay, so thanks.